Okay, so each week we like to break down stories, of course, from the three levels of government with CTV's political commentator, Scott Reed.
And he joins us live in the studio now for a recap of what's going on in all levels of government, starting with the federal stuff. Scott, a drastically different motion passed at the House of Commons last night, very different than what the NDP was pushing for, which was recognition of a Palestinian state.
Yeah, yesterday was a really wild day in the House of Commons, and they have these things called opposition motions. Opposition gets to take control of the day in the House of Commons, puts forward a motion. It's non-binding. It doesn't create law. It doesn't dictate government policy, but it's an expression of will from all the elected members of Parliament. And, you know, they wanted to recognize the state of Palestine. They wanted to sever all trade with Israel as a way of cutting off the ability of Israel to continue to bomb Gaza, and so on and so forth. And the government, for the entire day, refused to say where it stood on the motion. So they're giving speeches but not declaring their position. They're working behind the scenes, massive numbers of amendments. Now, in the end, I think the government's sort of patting itself on the back saying, listen, we managed to navigate these shoals. We got something that was more acceptable out of the NDP. That motion passed. But behind the scenes, this was a really divisive issue, really wrenching for members of Parliament. People feel very strongly, exposed how strong the divisions are on this question of Israel and Palestine within their caucus. So 3 members voted against. Many others were very upset. And I think that even though it's an opposition day motion, the government thinks it navigated, it's going to have long, long legacy, this. It really leaves bruises. And I'll tell you this much. When I was young and got involved in politics, the Jewish vote was reliably liberal. It is gone. It is gone. And as a consequence of that motion last night, you will not find hardly any Jewish voters casting their ballot for the Liberals in this next election. So this thing's going to leave some scars.
Okay, so was this a big test of the confidence supply agreement per se, and what was the risk reward for the New Democrats here?
Really disconnected from that. And the risk reward for the New Democrats is, to be blunt, they feel very strongly. Heather McPherson, who moved the motion, very, very strongly on this issue. Traditionally, NDP, very strongly in favor of not just a two-state solution, but very much in favor of Palestine. And, you know, it's impossible to take that position if you're the government of Canada as a matter of responsible foreign policy. You can't say, oh, well, we're going to recognize the state of Palestine, understanding that it is right now controlled by Hamas, who we have also identified as a terrorist group, and, of course, slaughtered tons of people on the 7th of October. So, challenging situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, turning to provincial politics, Bonnie Crombie coming out and saying that she's going to rule out a provincial carbon tax if she beats Doug Ford.
So this was her mulligan. 2 weeks ago, this question arose. She kind of whiffed on it, said, I'm not really going to address it. We'll have a strong climate change plan. Where are you at on the carbon tax? Where are you at? Conservatives advertising, the Premier himself putting tons of pressure, trying to wed Bonnie Crombie as a Liberal to the unpopular federal carbon tax. And you know, she kind of duffed it, took a lot of grief. Yesterday morning comes out and says, look, there will be none. I'm not going to do that. Now, you know, the Conservatives under Doug Ford are pushing back in a whole bunch of ways, saying, well, yeah, but you haven't distanced yourself from Justin Trudeau and so on and so forth. All I would say is this. She has effectively neutralized, or at least given herself a chance to neutralize, her position on this issue. And let's face it, this carbon tax, man, it is as unpopular a policy as we've seen in a long, long time. It's going up on the 1st of April. Nobody, Liberal Premier in Newfoundland, Liberal opposition leaders across the country, now Bonnie Crombie, no one wants to be stuck with this thing. And I just think it was an interesting move on her. And it's a signal to Ford and his people. She's going to have a little more game. So if you're going to take her out, you're going to have to play a better level of ball.
Okay, we've got to talk municipally about a minute for this, Scott. Talking about, you know, the growth in hate crimes here. Of course, some of it is, of course, connected to the October 7th attack here. We heard the chief come out and say, you know, they're really up this year. What's the political side of this then?
Well, I think for the, you know, for the mayor and for council, you have to ask yourself, all right, we did increase the police budget under duress from the chief, who was publicly lobbying for a 12% boost. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I mean, if it's a 93% jump in hate crimes, overwhelmingly directed at Jewish people, overwhelmingly instances of anti-Semitism since October 7th, what are we doing about it? Not just how are we responding, which, you know, you wonder about, but what's being done preventatively. And I know in my neighborhood, which borders on the Orthodox community, they've got a couple of mobile command posts, just as a discouraging sign publicly. But what more can be done? And it doesn't feel like this issue's fading. I think it's going to continue to be a challenge, not just for police, but for politicians. And they're going to have to be more forceful in their condemnations, because frankly, our city council has kind of played this ball on both sides also since October 7th.
Okay, CTV's political commentator Scott Reed. Always appreciate your time and insight, and we'll chat with you next week, Scott.
We'll see you next week,
Yeah,
guys.